Well, welcome everyone to Spirit of Truth Church here for this sermon on Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. And now let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we praise your name. And as we begin our study of the Gospel of Matthew, Lord, may we be reminded that you are the King of the Jews. You are the King of Kings. You are the Son of God. And you are the Messiah, the Anointed One of Israel, the Anointed One of God. Lord, may we learn from the Gospel of Matthew the rich Jewish heritage of who you are. Lord, we praise your name and we thank you that in your divine sovereignty you called Israel to serve as the nation that would bring forth the Messiah. We praise your name, Jesus, that your gospel goes out to both Jew and Gentile. And we thank you, Lord, that you have a purpose for the Israelite people and a purpose for the Gentiles forever. We praise your name. Amen. And now let's move to the reading of the scripture. Matthew 1, 1 through 17. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Ammon, Ammon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel is the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abihud, Abihud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Akim, Akim the father of Elihud, Elihud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Matan, Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. Now I would like to argue that the main idea of this passage is as follows. The genealogy of Matthew demonstrates that Jesus is the Jewish Davidic Messiah, and that Gentiles are being brought into the mission of God. So as we begin, I'd like to mention a couple of notes, first about the structure and literary form of this passage, and then also just an introduction to the text in terms of genealogies and some specifics that we're going to see as we begin our study. So there absolutely is a parallel to Luke 3:23 through 38 here in the text. However, they're not the same source. Most likely, they're either different sources or, quite possibly, different selections from within. And we're going to see why that would be the case. Because, again, they have different numbers of names and they have a different purpose. And they really are representative of two types of genealogies. There's ascending genealogies, which is Luke, which is actually showing Jesus' origin to God. Because remember, one of the big comments throughout the Gospels is going to be Jesus' origin from God. And then you have descending Matthew. And Matthew's emphasis is much more on Jesus as the true Davidic king, or the one to whom the royal line has been given, the Messiah. And so again, we're showing that royal line from Abraham to Christ in Matthew's genealogy. Now, the Joseph and Mary lineage, I've heard some things about that. However, when you look at the text, it actually does seem like it's Joseph in both cases. And so I may do something on that a little bit later, more deep dive into that, but it does seem like it's actually Joseph's line in both cases, just different names, because again, these lists are edited down. There's no question about that. and you can see it very clearly in certain cases. In terms of the arrangement, from Abraham to David, we have 13 names, again, including the first and third generation leading up to the list, which is how you get 14. David to exiles 14, and exile to Christ is 13. But again, the name leading in is being counted, and that's 14 then. So again, the arrangement is suggesting that Jesus is the son of David, or the royal Messiah, and here's the reason why. There's no quick understanding as to why 14, 14, 14, except for the fact of this thing called gematria, which is essentially the letters equating to numbers in David's name, which does add up to 14. So the thought is that the way he's presenting it is not necessarily there were exactly 14 generations between, because there's some very clear cases where they skip certain people in the generations, and it was like their grandson, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can find that out from actually earlier verses in Scripture. But that the fact of the 14 really is saying the time of completion is now here. You had 14 generations from Abraham to David, the beginning of the king, 14 from David the exile, line of kings, and now 14 to the end of the exile, or at least in the sense of the return of the king. Okay, and so again, linking that all into David, and a big emphasis on this gospel is Jesus is the Davidic covenant fulfillment. He is going to fill the Davidic covenant. He is going to sit the Davidic throne. That's the point. That's why he's come. One of the reasons. Now, in terms of an introduction to the text, why genealogies? Why kick off the gospel to the Jewish people with the genealogy? Well, we might read it in the modern day and just kind of say, oh yeah, I'm just going to kind of skip by and pass through. However, I want you to think about this to the Jewish people at that time. Jesus, they're going to claim Jesus is the rightful king. He's the king of the Jews. Genealogies in that time were the basis of social interaction, marriage, and inheritance. They could often signify political relationships between families or note a common ancestor. In this case, this genealogy, the fact that this exists, the fact that this is being done, is of paramount importance to the Jewish people, because this is how they're going to link Jesus to David. And if they can't do that, then a Jewish person need go no further. If Jesus doesn't have a link back to David, he simply cannot be the king. So they are setting out the beginning to simply show, or Matthew set at the beginning to show the Jewish people that Jesus is the true Davidic king. He is descended from the royal line, and he is the king. This is vitally important to the Jewish people, and it should be vitally important to us today too. Again, the Jewish people would read this saying, okay, let's see if this is true. Let's see if this is real. And then they look down the list and they say, oh my goodness, it is. He is descended from David. He is the Messiah. So this is hugely important to the Jewish people. Now, there are 13 groups of 14, again, show the special status of the ruler or the royal Messiah. So again, that's possibly linked through the numbering system to David. Now, this essentially functions as the prologue to Matthew's gospel, essentially demonstrating through lineage that yes, he is the ruler. This is who Jesus really is. He's the king of the Jews. And the rest of the book is going to see how people wrestle with and deal with this. How are people going to deal with the fact that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the prophesied king, that Jesus is the suffering servant, that Jesus is a future conquering a warrior king? Okay? How are they going to react? Again, the birth of Christ is no ordinary event. This is the birth of the Messiah and the Anointed One. So how are people going to react? Well, we're going to see. It's going to explain the Magi's reaction. They're going to be like, oh my goodness, the king is born, the king of the world. You're going to see Herod's reaction. We want to kill him. Why? Because Herod wants to rule and reign. So again, you're going to see that this really does open the whole story. It colors the whole story. Jesus, throughout the entire gospel, is a threat to the current establishment. There's no question about that. And they see him as that. And so they're going to try and trap him. They're going to try and do various things to essentially get him out. Because remember, there have been many people who have come and said they were messiahs. There have been many rulers. You've got the Maccabees as sort of rulers for a period of time. All of these different rulers have come and gone, and they're going to see Jesus as just another one of those. They're not going to see him as the true Messiah, or at least a certain group of them aren't. The Jews who are going to reject him in that generation. The Jews who accept him in that generation, however, do recognize that he's the Messiah. Now, again, the genealogy of Christ is going to open with a series of things called toledotes, or generations, or genealogy. That's what it is. Similar, actually, to the book of Genesis. And I think there is a allusion there at minimum. There's a minimum allusion or maybe an echo of Genesis, okay, in this. Additionally, because the covenants feature so heavily, as we'll see when we get into the individual verses, the covenants feature heavily, especially in the first 14 generations. They feature heavily. And so you're seeing this callback to Genesis, okay, the callback to the covenants, which is just Jewish prophecy. Jewish prophecy in general was always a call to return to the covenant. It was always a recall to lean on the promises of God. And we're being called to do the same thing here, which is a cool understanding of this first part. Additionally, remember, this is coming 6 centuries of vacancy on the throne. In other words, the Davidic throne's been empty for 600 years. Okay, so we're seeing some serious hope, if you will, for a Messiah. There's a messianic fervor, if you will, around this time of is the Messiah coming? Things like that. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into the exegesis of the Scripture. So right off the bat in verse 1:1. We have, again, this possible connotation of the record of Genesis, or of origins even, really showing the origin of Christ as something divinely prophesied, as something covenantally prophesied even. In other words, this is not random. This is not just, he's the king in this generation. he might have other sons. And no, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about this is the one who has been prophesied since the beginning, but they're going to focus really on Abraham and the Davidic covenant. And so we see this origins, which we translate genealogy. And there's actually a chiasm here. You're going to see Christ. We'll go ahead and go back up to verse here. This is genealogy. Jesus, David, Abraham. Then we go Abraham, David, Jesus once you get to the genealogy. So you're actually seeing a chiasm here. And again, that's because it's wanting to show you within the genealogy what's the important piece, the most important. It's Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant. David, the Davidic covenant, leads to Christ. That's the point. Why is Christ come? Because God promised it. Because God promised him through the Davidic covenant and promised him through Abraham. In some way, shape, or form, Christ is a part of the fulfillment. And we don't say it's the whole fulfillment because obviously there are land promises and other things and national restoration of Israel, things like that. But he is a major piece of the fulfillment of these covenants, specifically Davidic. I mean, he is the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. And then essentially in Abrahamic, you're going to see some very key places where he's going to come into play as well. So, given that, we see callbacks again to places in Genesis 2:4, 5:1, 6:1 that indicate that Jesus is a fulfillment of events and bringing a new beginning or a new creation. That's one of the things of the Messiah, is there's going to be this new creation. Now let's go into verse 1:1b of Jesus Christ. Okay, so we've coupled Jesus Christ, the Messiah, Jesus the Messiah, with the Son of David. You can't do that without getting messianic. Okay, the second you incorporate the anointed one, that phrase, the Meshiach, in Hebrew anyway, along with Christos in the Greek, with Son of David, that's messianic. There's an automatic expectation there. There's an expectation that this is going to be the victorious, conquering Messiah, that this is going to be the anointed figure, this is going to be the prince, the branch of David, the scepter, the Son of God, the Son of Man, royalty. That's the vision you're getting. And rightfully so. And this is important, because some people want to deny that that's the actual vision. No, they were right. They were just wrong about the timing. And they were unwilling, many of them, to change their view and understand, he's going to return, and he's a suffering servant this time. There was an unwillingness at some level of people at times for that. But they were not wrong. They were looking at scriptures. They were just selectively looking at the scriptures. Because in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, it's very clear the Messiah was also going to suffer and die and return. So we're going to get into those messianic prophecies while we go through Matthew. Now, we then move on to, again, the Son of David title. It's a messianic title, there's no question. This, again, it's a reference to the Davidic covenant, that there's a promise that the throne of David would endure through the exile. So remember, guys, they're seeing exile, 600 years, no one sitting on the throne. What do they have normally in a normal nation? Throne's gone. Never going to come back. But they had a promise from God that throne's eternal, that throne would endure. So they have this promise of the Davidic throne, that God would send a righteous branch to remove foreign oppressors of the land and return to Israel. And we know this is going to come true. We just finished our sermon series on Revelation. We saw when that's actually going to happen. It will return to Israel. Now, Matthew's emphasis, however, is not on destroying Israel's enemies. It's on the fulfillment of prophecy. And there's a serious reference to the Davidic covenant already, right off the bat. And then he's called the son of Abraham. Now, again, the son of Abraham is now in reference to the Abrahamic covenant. He's a true Israelite, okay? This is the one who will, quote from the Abrahamic covenant, bring blessing to the nations. The nations will be blessed. Okay, well, that's about to come true in full, at least in part, it'll be in full again in the Messianic kingdom, but it's going to be, and the eternal kingdom, but it's going to be a serious blessing. It's going to come through Jesus even now through the new covenant. It's going to be brought in here. Now, Abraham is then called the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob. Again, drawing right back to, you're the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Guess what? Same God, same covenant, same promise, and now we're going to see the fulfillment of this thing. So we are getting ready, and this is why he's the good link from the Old to the New, the Old Testament to the New Testament. It's a good link because he's drawing on this rich literary references and prophetic references to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to the covenants. Remember, Abraham is the father of the nation, and the election was through and started with him, with Abraham, then through Isaac and Jacob to the covenant people of Israel. So there are heavy ties of Jesus as the Jewish Messiah who will bring blessing to the nations and the Gentiles as well. Now, interesting piece here, though. Jacob is called the father of Judah because, again, the kingly line is going to come through Judah. But it's also and his brothers. Now, why is that? Well, because, again, we're going to see that Jesus is also a type of Israel. We're going to see this sort of throughout the entire thing. So even here in the genealogy, it's not just Judah, but it's the father of Judah and his brothers, wanting us to think about Israel as a nation, Israel as a whole. Okay, not just the tribe of Judah, because remember, the way things have been broken down, you have the northern and southern kingdoms, there's a desire for reunification, even in this, that essentially the branches are going to be restored, Israel's going to be one again. So there's a little bit of an allusion to that here, and an emphasis again on the covenant people. Now we get into Judah being the father of Perez and Zerah, and here's the interesting thing with that. First, Ruth is going to trace Perez to David, actually, in the book of Ruth. And we're going to see how the inclusion of Ruth as a worthy ancestress to David through faithful devotion is true. But the mother was Tamar. Now, this is some shifty relationships of how Perez and Zerah were birthed, and you can read more about that. But again, she's being placed in this list. There's some shadiness to the births here. She's one of only 4 women, and either the 4 women were foreigners and Gentiles, or at least married to Gentiles, as in the case of Bathsheba to Uriah the Hittite. So we're seeing through some of these women the inclusion of Gentiles into the lineage of Jesus, or at least the inclusion of some of these things, including the inclusion of some sinful acts in that line, stating that even through humanity's fallenness, God's faithfulness still comes through. So there's some interesting themes that are coming, why we would include Tamar, for example. Okay, again, Tamar was a Canaanite. Rahab, who we'll see later, was a Jericho. Ruth was a Moabitess, and Bathsheba either was a Hittite herself or she was married. She was married to a Hittite. She may have been Hittite. We just don't know. But either way, you're seeing these 4 women, some of them with marked faith, others not so much. But their inclusion's vital because it's showing a Gentile link. It's showing that even in the midst of sinfulness and things, we're going to see this with the kings too, the inclusion of certain kings. It's like even in sinful kings, God's faithfulness to the covenant was still going to pass. He would never eliminate the lineage of kings from David, even though he may have made it so that some of their sons never sat the throne. In other words, the time of the exile, the Davidic king was going to come. No question about it. The Davidic king was going to come through David's line. So again, coupled with the appearance of the Magi, we've got a mission to the Gentiles. It's pretty exciting. And again, using these women who came from foreigners or Gentiles, or at least some relationship, again, sometimes with some kind of sketchy backgrounds, sometimes, however, also people of faith. In the case of Rahab, the prostitute who actually had great faith and was commended for that. We're seeing a foreshadowing of Mary as a person who had, again, from the world's perspective, maybe a sketchy issue going on with the birth of Jesus. We now know it to be that he was a virgin birth, a divine conception. However, remember, at the time for the Jewish people, there was a serious doubt to that. There was some serious doubt to Mary's solidity in that area. And so this is something that they're even sort of addressing in this by including these ladies who had great faith. So we're seeing, again, all 4 of these women, though, were divine providence. So the incorporation of these women into the lineage of Jesus was always divine providence. Now, in 1:3, we see Hezron. Now, Hezron was actually part of the 70 who migrated with Jacob to Egypt. And he had a very important clan of southern Judah called the Hezronites. So there's a reason for his inclusion as well, being one of the great leaders. Now, there's a 400-year period from Perez to Aminadab. This again incorporates the time of exile in Egypt. And Nahshon is the chief of the tribe of Judah in the wilderness. So we're even seeing kind of an acknowledgement of the wilderness time, of the exile in Egypt, and then we're seeing the deliverance from the exile by the mention of Nahshon. Okay, then we move into, and that was Numbers 2:3. Then we move into Boaz, whose mother is Rahab. And again, Rahab is a prostitute who saved the spies from Jericho by hiding them in her house, and that's where Boaz comes from. But again, it's not direct mother. There's several generations between the two. But that's the Rahab. That is the Rahab, and that's the Boaz. So we're seeing this kind of link. And it's very interesting that she is directly mentioned there. Again, being who she was, a Jericho prostitute. But she has great faith. And this is now what's interesting is actually in the Jewish writings, Rahab was considered actually a proselyte to Judaism. And it was stated now again, I mean, this is from the Jewish teachings, that she married Joshua. And that she was the ancestress of both Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So there's even some kind of interesting potential things. We don't know necessarily that's true, but it's written in some of the Jewish writings. Again, she's listed in the Women of Faith in Hebrews 11:31, as well as in James 2:25. Now then we go into Boaz being the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. So what are we drawing at here? We're now drawing at the covenant faithfulness of God and the kinsman redeemer motif. So we're pulling that in, that maybe this descendant's going to be a kinsman redeemer of sorts. He's going to redeem a people to himself, that he will be faithful to the covenant and bring them in. And guess who? To even Gentiles. So now we're bringing that whole story of Ruth into the genealogy as well. So people are considering, oh, wait a second, we're seeing this as part of Jesus' lineage now. And so now what we're seeing is we're seeing all of these stories of the Old Testament, all of these people, all of these themes are now coming out, and we're seeing all of this, how it's going to relate to the Messiah. Then we have Obed, Jesse, and King David. Now, again, the primary role of Jesse was to send David to Saul and his brothers. That was in Samuel 16, 14 through 23, and 17, 12 through 18. King David is now being mentioned. Why? We're tracing the royal line of Jesus. Matthew moves from Abraham to Christ and traces this royal lineage. Luke is going to move from Christ to Adam and traces the common roots back to God, saying his origin comes from God. And this actually ends the first list of 14 names. Now again, in this list we have multiple reference to covenants. Covenant faithfulness, kinsman redeemer. We've got faithfulness in a time of wilderness. We've got leaders of Israel. We've got multiple women mentioned from who had maybe sketchy past, but were women of faith. We've got mention of Gentiles being incorporated. This is just rich with all of these different people that are brought into the line and what that's saying about who Jesus is and what he's going to do. So let's move on to the second set. Now we have David was the father of Solomon. His mother was the wife of Uriah. No, Bathsheba's not mentioned. Uriah is, again, Hittite Gentile. Again, Bathsheba issue, there were some problems there. That's probably why she wasn't mentioned by name, but maybe he gave it to Uriah, again, wanting to incorporate the Gentiles and to honor him as well. It makes sense that he would receive the honor in this situation. And again, it also highlights the presence of Gentiles in Jesus' origins. Even if Bathsheba wasn't, we don't know. But there is this inclusion of a Gentile name here, which is very fascinating and very important. Then we get Solomon to Rehoboam. And this list from verses 7 to 10 is from 1 Chronicles 3, 10 through 14. And it's providential because here's the reason why. There's going to be a lot of evil kings that are going to come. And God is essentially showing that humanity, for all intents and purposes, David's line failed. The line of kings fails. Okay, and that's really important to understand. That it is not on the line of kings itself that God is placing, quote, quote, that God is placing his trust in, people should place their trust in. The line of kings fails. There's no question about that. Evil reigns in the kings. Not all of them. We're going to talk about some good ones, but evil for the most part is going to dominate the day. Yet, in spite of man's faithlessness, God is going to preserve the line of David. He's going to bring forth a Messiah from the line of David. And that's a major theme through the second piece of the genealogy. So again, we see evil kings. We see Rehoboam to Abijah. Rehoboam was lavish. He had extensive harem that he inherited from his father Solomon. He overtaxed the people, stressed them, and the northern 10 tribes revolted and split Israel for the rest of the time. Abijah and Asa. Abijah, again, started out okay, but ended poorly. Asa removed the altars in high places and brought the nation back to God. And guess what? This is one of the reasons why he's in here. 35 years of good reign. Great. Then you get to Jehoshaphat. He brought even further reform. Again, he's also mentioned. Again, at this point, Jehoshaphat, even the surrounding nations began to fear the Lord. So again, you have that in here, like Jesus is going to be the one who's going to cause the nations to come and revere and fear the Lord. But then you get to Jehoram, who was evil. He married a son to Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and he murdered his brothers for the throne, essentially. You then go from Jehoram to Uzziah, where 3 evil kings are omitted. They are omitted. And Uzziah died a leper. We move then to Jotham, who was a good king but failed to remove the high places, to Ahaz, who sacrificed his children, and under him Judah became a vassal of Assyria and lost its freedom forever, never to fully regain it. But then after Ahaz, you have Hezekiah. And Hezekiah comes, he cleanses the temple, destroys the high places, made a secret pact with Babylon, and had to pay tribute with gold from the temple. So it was under his reign that the gold in the temple, at least in part, was sacked. Not sacked, but just basically given tribute. After Hezekiah, you get Manasseh, who was heralded as one of the most wicked kings in the history of Judah. He killed his own son in ritual sacrifice. But interestingly enough, he repents, removes the altars, and reinstitutes temple worship. And then you go on to Amon, who basically has 2 years of idol worship. Not good. And then we get Josiah, the greatest reformer, 8 years old, which restored a measure of independence to Judah, removed all of the idolatrous images, and rediscovered the book of the law and the Passover. He's in here for very specific reasons. Jesus is going to be a fulfillment of the law. This is a key place of it, and the Passover. This is one of the reasons why this is in here. Josiah then goes to Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of exile. Jeconiah is actually the grandson, and you have essentially 3 months of an evil reign. Nebuchadnezzar comes, took all the treasures from the temple. The brothers could be, for example, Zedekiah, who led the nation to exile, but now we're going into exile. So we've seen some good kings mentioned here for some specific purposes, some allusions to things Jesus was going to do in terms of fulfilling the law and the prophets, but ultimately exile happens. Now, this is the completion of the second list. And what you're going to see during the third list is that through the exile, there's a divine hand to preserve the Messianic line. A preservation of the Messianic line. Now remember, 600 years of no king? Problem. You're most likely going to have the dissolution of the kingly line and it's going to be gone. But no, there is a divine providence to preserve the kingly and Messianic line. And so there's a connection, again, to the Davidic covenant, where God promised David, you will have a son on the throne. Your throne's eternal. I'm going to make sure one of you from you is going to be on this throne. So we have Jeconiah to Shealtiel. Shealtiel brings a legal ancestry from before the exile to after the exile. So that's kind of our link from pre-exile to post-exile. And then we get Zerubbabel. He was the person appointed the governor of Jerusalem and a messianic figure in and of himself. I mean, he had a lot of messianic overtones to him. He was called Yahweh's signet ring and the chosen one in Haggai 2:23, the lampstand and the anointed in Zechariah 4:2 and 14. So we've got a real big messianic figure in Zerubbabel. So by linking him in there, I mean, we're really pushing the messianic themes here. Now, in verses 13 through 15, we have 9 names that are simply unknown to us in history. Matthew probably got them from some kind of traditional list, much like he used Chronicles. Again, we just don't know a lot about them. That's okay. But the point is, and the thing is, it's a link through the time of the exile, and that's very, very important. And that brings us to 116, which is Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Now, Matthew has legal, not physical descent on the mind here. Jesus' inheritance is going to come from Joseph. So the emphasis, again, is on the husband of Mary, Joseph, and then you have Mary as the mother of the Messiah. And so you've actually got paternity really from 2 things in this. You've got paternity from the divine, and you've got the paternity from the human. The human line is going to essentially establish the fact that he is the king, and through Mary is going to establish the fact that he's the son of God, that God literally caused this birth to happen. And there's a fascinating thing in that verse. From whom is born Jesus, who is called the Christ. Okay? Mary, not Joseph, conceives and delivers the Messiah. It's not Joseph who fathered so-and-so. It's from whom is born. Christos, again, is not anathros in the Greek. It's governed by the ho and is a messianic title. And here's the interesting thing. The word born is passive in the Greek, not active. Which means it's not Mary who's, quote, causing this bornness to happen. It's almost as though Mary is passively birthing the Christ. This is a very, very strong wording to indicate that it's not Joseph, it's not Mary, but it is God himself that is causing the birth of Christ. So that's pretty cool. And in essentially this genealogy, we're getting a threefold climax. We're getting the coming of the Messiah, the woman who bears him, and the sovereign control of God who directs this whole process. And then in verse 14, we again have the statement of 14 from Abraham to David, David to the Babylonian exile, and exile to the Messiah, which again is most likely linking to something about David's name being 14 as well. And again, the son of David has arrived, the kingdom is at hand. And so now I'd like to go ahead and jump into some of the themes we've seen pop out of this genealogy. So first, we have the divine providence. So we're seeing God in sovereign control of history, right? We're seeing all of these bad maybe situations or odd situations of different births happening, maybe sometimes at random, or things that, even with the Ruth incident, I mean, man, that had to be divinely orchestrated for that to even happen. So many different events. And we're seeing his sovereign control over world history and guiding it for his glory. We're seeing the supernatural, we're going to see anyway, the supernatural intervention in Herod's murder of the children to preserve Christ. We're going to see the dream given to the Magi to bring them to where they need to be. We're going to see angelic messages. Again, God's hand truly guiding the lives of everyone involved in this, and arguably guiding the hand of history itself. And I think that's one of the things that really this shows is God is guiding things in history. History is not up to its own devices. God is bringing things to pass through history. He has sovereign control. Now, a second theme is the idea of God's focus on the outcast and the downtrodden. We're seeing them mention these four women. Again, they were outsiders. They were many times encased in some form of scandal, but they were chosen by God and made an essential part of the history of the Messiah, of the coming of the King. They were brought into this. We see this as well in the selection of the disciples. Some of these people were despised, like Matthew the tax collector, insurrectionists like the zealot, peasants, fishermen. And yet they're brought into God's story because, again, it's not about the people. It's not about, oh, this is a great person. It's about this is a great God. In 2 Corinthians 11:30, I'd like to go ahead and read that now. It says, "If boasting is necessary, I will boast about my weaknesses." And nothing could be further from the truth in terms of these people. It's not about the great things. I mean, some of them did have great faith. I'm not arguing that. But there's a lot of weakness here too, and it's showing God's faithfulness in the midst of that. Again, and I love this quote from one of the commentaries that I used. It says this. I'll go ahead and read the quote. "When God works through our low status and weakness, the glory goes to him. None of us should ever feel inferior or inadequate. Rather, we should rejoice in such, for God turns human weakness into divine strength." And we're seeing that throughout this genealogy. Now, another theme is this idea of a worldwide mission. Again, these women were all Gentiles or related to Gentiles, and we're seeing the Gentiles being brought in here. It's a preparation to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. We're seeing that focus too on the Abrahamic and Davidic covenant to be a blessing to all nations by taking the gospel to the Jew first and then the Gentile. And so we're seeing this universal mission to the nations being seated here, even in the genealogy. Now, in terms of Christocentric setting, we're seeing the Messiah is now here. The time of waiting is done. The Messiah is here. The Jewish understanding of a conquering king, not necessarily how it's going to be, but the Messiah is here. Now, David was a great warrior king. There's no question about that. And Jesus is too. It's just not for this time. People wanted the destruction of the Romans and the Jewish people as the new world rulers, but Matthew's going to teach them, no, Jesus, the Messiah, is coming as a suffering servant. He's going to be dying for the sins of humankind. He's going to be returning to defeat the enemies at the second coming. That Christ has arrived and there's a time of fulfillment of prophecy. So much of the prophecies were fulfilled in this period of time. Fulfillment is a key theme. And victory is coming soon. Christ's return will be imminent. So these are some of the main themes of Matthew. There's also this idea the kingdom is here. The kingdom is near. Okay, again, there's a hope for the Jewish people in the Davidic reign. That the Messiah would fulfill this Davidic reign, reinstitute them as a nation, bring them all back to God. And what's going to happen for the period of time in between is that the saved people are going to become citizens of heaven and resident aliens in our earthly home. And so we're seeing all of these things. We're seeing this world mission to the Gentiles. We're seeing the salvation that's going to come from the Messiah. We're seeing the focus on Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, as the King of David. Now, in terms of application, we're seeing God's sovereignty both in the history of here and also in our own lives. There's no question that God's sovereignty extends beyond just, for example, the Davidic line. We're seeing God's sovereignty throughout all of these historical events that even allowed this to be possible. Okay? We're seeing God's sovereignty and his purpose and his will come through even in tough times, like the 600 years of being kingless and the 400 some years of exile. And so there is a true reality that to all of this we can draw on this theme of God's sovereignty. Second, there's this covenant faithfulness. The covenants are being practically hit into us here in this genealogy. Davidic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, and by Abrahamic covenant, the coming of the new covenant. And so we're seeing the covenant faithfulness. God he's not going to leave. He's not going to forsake. He is coming. He is going to bring a new heart. He is going to bring spiritual renewal and restoration. It's coming. And we're seeing that right here in the genealogy. Now, in conclusion, I would like to say this. The genealogy of Jesus calls us to recognize Jesus as the King of the Jews, the Jewish Messiah, the King of Kings, the Savior of the world, and source of fulfillment of the promise to Abraham to be a blessing to all nations. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Dear Lord, we praise your name and we thank you that you have provided us all a Messiah. We thank you that he's a Jewish Messiah. We thank you that he's the Savior of the world. We praise your name that we can call you Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord, for all that you've done. And God, may you bless our time as we study Matthew and bring even more understanding to who you are as the King of the Jews, as the Anointed One, the Messiah, the Son of God, the Son of Man. We praise your name and worship you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us here at Spirit of Truth Church, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.